All right, welcome back. Still road to 2023 and have as my guest Dr. Love Nefo, a public affairs analyst, a forensic social psychologist. And we've also have our good friends who have joined us online. James from the Gambia, Obi from US, Paul Iwunze from US, and Engineer Femi joining us from Abuja, Nigeria. The main topic for today is the death of Queen Elizabeth, assessing the role and impact of Britain in the evolution of Nigeria. Since the death of the Queen, there have been a lot of reactions over the role Great Britain played in Nigeria before and after independence. And most importantly, the angle of the war, the issue of slavery, colonialism, and of course the Nigerian Biafra civil war that led to the loss of over a million Nigerians from the southeast. Her death has also thrown up people questioning historical past where people want to find out what really happened. What are the true pictures? Of course, one of the tweets that generated so much reaction is that of Professor Juanya, who is based in the United States. Even as much as a lot of persons say we don't talk ill of the dead, there are those who have argued that if you condemn colonialism and slavery, then you won't be far from sharing her thoughts. So tonight we want to really look at, was the monarchy really influenced what Nigeria has become today? Did the UK, and by extension, the monarchy as the head of state, and of course we had the prime minister head of government, what role between the head of government, the monarchy, and the head of government play in the evolution of Nigeria? Let's start gradually to unearth the role of Britain or United Kingdom in where Nigeria is today.
Well, first and foremost, Nigeria is a colonial product. Nigeria is not a nation formed organically. It's not a it's not a natural creation. We are well over 250 ethnic nationalities that were bunched together by colonialism. That instrumentality of colonialism brought Nigeria together and forced it into nationhood. In other words, Nigeria, right from inception, uh, was sort of contrived for a purpose. Britain wanted to formalize what some of our citizens were already doing in the country. Uh, the trading that was going on, if you remember the Royal Niger Company, Goldie and others, their roles at the early times, even before colonialism itself, there was that link between Nigerian local traders and their foreign counterparts, particularly Britain. Of course, you should know that as at that time, before the year 1900, much of Nigeria was it's still at what you may call a rudimentary formative stages. They haven't quite evolved into well-established nation states in modern sense. And but then the natural abundance of raw materials and so on and so forth was there, and it was needed by United Kingdom and other European powers. And of course, that coincided with the time what you may call industrial revolution was peaking, and the raw materials needed to feed the industries in UK, in Europe, you were abundant in Africa, West Africa, in Nigeria. So you can see what brought them down here. Trade. They needed our produce. palm, cocoa, you know, rubber, and others. They needed a lot of all that. And don't forget that we had already gotten a slave trade abolished, and much of the people working for them there, the supplies coming from mainly West Africa, it had been cut off. What was now left was for them to creatively find other ways of getting the same people to be working for them. So for me, I see colonialism as a transformation of that same slave trade. And it means that rather than be transported to their countries to work for them there, you work for them in your own country. That's exactly how colonialism comes across to me. Now, in all this, the role of the monarchy and its kind of government and governance cannot be lost to anybody. Even a cursory observer can see that the queen cannot be divorced from the economic and political policies of our country. And if you check also, when the current queen that just passed came to power in 1952, Britain was smarting from the Second World War, and the father, King George VI, just passed, and she took over from the father in 1962. Nigeria gained independence in 1960. What that means is that she was up to 8 years on the throne, and in her late 30s when Nigeria got independence. By the way, she climbed into the throne when she was just 26 years old, but she had come of age by the time we got independence. She was in her late 30s already. Now, there's a picture I'm trying to paint here, because the question is what role, and what role, and then the relationship. All this whole thing is to see if the queen shares any responsibility, or can take any blame or credit for what has happened to Nigeria or in Nigeria under her monarchy. Yes, the monarchy is a constitutional one, and the head, who is the monarch, the queen, occupied the office of the head of state. The head of government is the prime minister because they run a parliamentary system of government. That said, it is true that the prime minister runs the government, but the prime minister cannot run the government of a country, unless he or she agrees with the head of state on so many things. And if you have what we call overall policies of a country, those policies, are maintained from government to government. For example, even in Nigeria, there are things certain presidents of Nigeria don't want to get involved in. For example, if you want to call a national conference to decide whether or not Nigeria will they remain a one country. No president wants to be credited with that kind of a thing. So there are settled policies in Britain which cannot be changed by any prime minister. And the current queen that just passed on, saw the coming and going of 15 prime ministers, 15 prime ministers, including Liz Truss that just took over the reins of government, and got the instrumentality to form government from the Queen only 2 or 3 days before the Queen actually exited. Now, you see, the Nigeria as a colonial product, was not what you may call an exclusive project of the whoever was the prime minister, of Britain by the time Nigeria became in the amalgamation took place in 1914, or even when the protectorates were formed, Southern Protectorate, 1900, 1906, and Northern Protectorate, I think 1903. When they were eventually merged in 1914, it was not an exclusive decision of of the head of government. It was a national policy. It was a national program. The decision to have Nigeria as one country Yes, the queen was may not be directly involved and didn't need to be directly involved, but he met her approval because there's no place in history where you can find the opinion of the queen condemning colonialism, condemning slavery. She never did. You can Google it. You can Google the opinion of Queen Elizabeth over all these things. You will find where someone like King Charles the third, the one that just succeeded the mother, where he actually expressed concern and disdain over and for colonialism and slavery. That's a view that can be attributed to him, but you cannot find the same for the mother. What that means is that even if you are not in a position to change anything, it cannot stop you from airing your own opinion. Your own opinion should not it cannot be tied to your chest and taken to your grave. So if you do not repudiate a policy that has been adjudged by history to be wrong, when you had the opportunity to do so, she was on the throne for 70 solid years, and she never said anything against the slavery, against the colonialism. He met her approval. That's just my own position. My overall position on the queen, I believe she brought a candor, elegance. She was an extremely beautiful woman. She brought courage. There was that charisma she brought to the throne, which nobody can take away from her. But the supremacy of the Aryan race over the rest of the world was symbolized in the same personnel. That's the point here. If you look at the carriage, there's this carriage that takes her around. Look at the pictures, the gold carriage that she sits in. You will see the pictures. The pictures, because those things they're not ordinary paintings. These are pictures, even if they are paintings, they're paintings of reality. You will see paintings that have to do with slavery there. You see subjugation. You will see that clear and conscious demarcation between opulence and poverty, between aristocracy and the protectorate. So if she could sit in a carriage, that is decorated with all that, if she cannot claim that she didn't understand what those pictures mean. She knows what they are. Yeah, and she allowed them. She allowed those pictures to be used to capture her monarchy. It means that she agreed. She agreed that they were in order. And if you want to know the role she played ultimately, I think the role she played in Nigeria as a monarch, it was quite symbolic. The first you would see that right from 1914 when Lord Lugard, you know, amalgamated the countries. If you go through history and see the reasons provided, for the amalgamation and for even colonialism itself, it's essentially economic. And you can find records showing that the need to amalgamate North and South Nigeria was economic. Lord Lugard, in communicating the colonial government in Britain, was arguing that, look, I run Northern Protectorate on deficit and run Southern Protectorate on surplus. Merging the two, would balance my books better for me. But what was required by colonial laws and colonial government, home government, was that you receive money to take care of your deficit and then return surplus to the colonial Britain. So argument of Lugard was unassailable. That since the two protectorates were contiguous, North and South protectorates of Nigeria, that merging them together will balance out the books. He doesn't have to be writing to Britain to get money to take care of the deficits of running a Northern Protectorate. And that was granted. And again, there was also another overarching economic reason. The produce that were gotten from the Northern Protectorate needed to be shipped to Britain. There is no sea up north. You have the sea in the south. So what he needed was to through that amalgamation, construct railway that can run from Kano, from Sokoto down to the Atlantic. Do you understand that? He wouldn't be able to do that if southern Nigeria was a
On its
separate
own.
country, and the northern Nigeria a separate country. Even though under the same colonial Britain, there could still be some understanding. But of course, you know that there will always be problem and friction if you have the countries run as separate administrations. So these were the two key reasons why the northern and southern protectorate were brought together. Otherwise, even Britain knew that North and South Nigeria it can't be one country. That's it. So now, if we if we look at this economic logic of colonialism, you will see that it does not meet our social, economic, political, cultural, and other needs. It falls short because it satisfies only Britain and does not satisfy our own internal needs. And that is why Nigeria has essentially remained a geographical expression. I was listening to Chief Olusegun Obasanjo, former president, speak somewhere in Oka, and he may use the same expression. He said that Nigeria is still a country and not yet a nation. Do you say that? Former head of state, former president saying this, so you can see it's not just an opinion that only I hold. No, is the fact. And you can see the centrifugal forces, centrifugal forces in full undress, running riots around Nigeria. You just talked about Nnamdi Kanu talking about self-determination. Think about other parts of the country. Is there any part of the country where you don't find the same agitation for self-determination? What Boko Haram is doing is agitation for self-determination, whether we like it or not, because they are telling you that they want a caliphate. They want an Islamic state out of Nigeria. That's a self-determination push. If you go to southwest, you will see that what Sunday Igboho and others before him and those even with him are saying about Oduduwa Republic. It's still the same thing. I was listening to Professor Akintoye the other day. He was even predicting that Oduduwa Republic will come before the election slated for February next year. This is an election that stands just less than 6 months away. So you can see, go to Niger Delta. It's still the same problem. Why is it so? Because the colonial government did not pay attention to the natural contours of a Nigeria put in place by God Himself. If you have three major ethnic groups in Nigeria: Igbo, Hausa, and Yoruba, and none is less than 30 million persons, you are already admitting that you have, you know, a minimum of three countries rolled up in one. How many countries of the world are up to 30 million? Argentina, what is the population of Australia, Argentina? All of them. You can Google and find the kind of the countries that you consider major that are already, that are that are less than 30 million. So if you have Igbos more than 30 million, Yorubas more than 30 million, Hausas more than 30 million, you cannot deny these people nationhood. They are nations in their own rights, going by their geographical space, going by their natural endowments, going by their populations. They are countries in their own rights. So if you don't give them the power to form countries, agitations will continue. The only way to deal with that will be to sit them down and agree, get them to agree that this is how we can become a country. This is what is lacking in Nigeria. The national confab of a Goodluck Ebele Jonathan in October 2014, I think. That confab, that came away with so many recommendations, more than 600, was actually consummated based on this same thing I'm talking about. Nigerians are here to agree on nationhood, and that is why we have remained essentially a geographical expression. Coming back again to what I was talking about, the Queen and her place in all this. You see, Britain never really was interested in founding a country. They don't, even now, they are not quite keen on having Nigeria become a nation. Not a country. We're a country, but we're not a nation. Now, why is this so for Britain? Remember the original economic reason why Britain even came into Nigeria in the first place. That has not diminished. If you look at the political economy of Nigeria and the things that have to do with what you call neocolonialism, neocolonialism is a new form of colonialism. I told you that I personally see colonialism as a transformation and transmutation of slavery. Getting, rather than have a blacks shipped to them in Europe and the Americas, you get them to work, do the same work in your own country for them. That is what is going on. So colonialism, you know, was an economic project, and what succeeded that economic project is neocolonialism. In other words, what Britain wants out of Nigeria is still going to them, and it is going to them through neocolonial arrangements. How have they achieved that? I will do a construction here. You see, when Britain left the shores, they didn't leave Nigeria happily. Britain was more or less chased out of Nigeria by nationalists, led by Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe. Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe happened to be an Igbo man, right? From the southeast, even though he was born and bred in Zungeru, somewhere in Niger, northern Nigeria. But inadvertently, he was an Igbo man. And by the time Biafra, not Biafra this time, by the time the anti-colonial forces were germinating, sprouting, and growing, his identity was not hidden. They knew who he was. Now, you will discover that the three key political parties that were in the fray when Britain was folding her flags, played the divergent roles. Action Group and NCNC, Action Group led by Awolowo, NCNC led by Nnamdi Azikiwe, were up in arms against colonial Britain. They wanted them to go. They wanted self-governance. They wanted independence. In fact, as early as 1956, somebody like Anthony Nahara of NCNC was already moving a motion for no. You see, people keep making this mistake. Tony Nahara never moved a motion for Nigeria's independence. He moved a motion for Nigeria's self-governance in 1956. The motion for Nigeria's independence was moved in 1960 by one Yoruba lawmaker. I can't remember his name now, but I'll text to you later. But we keep crediting Tony Nahara with moving a motion for Nigeria's independence. He didn't. His motion came in 1956. He was moving a motion for self-governance. So let Nigerians take care of their government. That was what he wanted, especially the regions. Now, what I'm trying to say is that Britain wasn't happy with Action Group, wasn't happy with the NCNC and their leaderships, particularly Zik. And that was why, they were reluctant to hand power over to Zik. You see, there is evidence that Britain did not conduct free and fair census. There is evidence that Britain did not conduct even free and fair election. There is evidence that Britain did not conduct delineation of constituencies in Nigeria in a way as to reflect the country's population, right? What Britain did was to rely on landmass. And by relying on landmass and ignoring the population of southern Nigeria, Britain gave northern Nigeria 53% of the constituencies from where the House of Reps members were elected into the newly formed House of Representatives. What the implication of this was that the Northern People's Congress, led by Sir Ahmadu Bello and assisted by Sir Tafawa Balewa, their place in history, their place in the polity as preeminent in the process of producing the Prime Minister of Nigeria was guaranteed by Britain. That's the point I'm making. Now, if you look at that scenario, you will see that it has continued. It hasn't changed. If Britain, had contrived the constituencies as to give Northern People's Congress an undue advantage, a kind of what you may call gerrymandering. It was an institutional rigging of the polity, positioning the Northern People's Congress in a way as to give them the leeway to the headship of the country. That was precisely what happened. Now, Zik had no choice other than to become a ceremonial president, despite the fact that his party produced 2.5 million votes, popular votes, followed by Awolowo that produced, Awolowo's action group produced 1.96 million votes. Northern People's Congress produced 1.93 million votes. It meant that Zik led the pack by more than 600,000 votes. But in terms of the constituencies, who actually won in the constituencies, Northern People's Congress won the majority of the seats. Now, the then Governor General, I think his name was Robertson or somebody like that, wrote the Northern People's Congress a letter to form government, whereas the three of them, none of them formed the majority. So why write them the letter? Why the hurry to write the Northern People's Congress letter to form government when they don't or didn't have the number of seats they needed to form government? You should have allowed negotiation. You should have allowed the political parties that contested and won seats in that election to decide how to form government. If Britain did not put on that pressure, right? If Britain did not put up that pressure, there was that chance that Action Group not and NCNC would have formed government. And if they did, the Northern People's Congress would have been forced into opposition. But Britain blocked that. That's the point I'm making. So if you look at this born to rule mentality of the North, it was something guaranteed for them by the colonial Britain,
But
and even sustained at the moment.
there are those who have argued that when the three could not form the majority, and then the South, NCNC and the Action Congress, had an opportunity of forming a government, or in terms of
Yeah,
forming an alliance.
that's what I've said. That's what I've said.
Both of them couldn't do that, leading to NCNC
By
now
that's what
aligning
I'm
with
saying.
NAPO.
Part of this history, history is not studied in Nigeria anymore. Part
Yeah.
of this history is lost in the shuffles. How many Nigerians actually know that the then Governor General wrote Northern People's Congress to form government? That is a problem. So if you were Zik,
Premeditated.
yes, if you were Zik, what would you do? If Zik had waited one more day, huh? If he had waited one more day, he would have been forced into opposition because Awolowo was also qualified to take up the office of the ceremonial president. These are problems. So Britain created that scenario that led to a kind of scramble. Now, let me draw your attention to one other history I ran into of late, as a matter of fact. I read somewhere, and I want the SYMFONI TV to investigate this claim. I read somewhere that in in September, 30th of September 1960, that there was a mock battle between the British army and the army of the Caliphate. There was a mock battle. There was a battle between the two, and in that battle, the Caliphate won. It was a mock battle, but it was symbolic nonetheless. Why was it symbolic? The party Colonial Britain returned the flag they seized from Sultan of Sokoto in 1903. It was that flag they seized that symbolized that Britain had taken over the caliphate. They returned the flag to them. September 1960. I want to be proved wrong on this. You now ask yourself, why did Britain return the flag? Why did they go through that ritual of a mock battle in which they allowed themselves to be symbolically defeated by an army they defeated in 1903. Do you get the problem here? For me, what I say was the determination of Britain to position the North to dominate the rest of the country. And that brings me to the Civil War. When the Civil War broke out, the position.
You need to be a little fast so that we
Okay,
can
now,
take something
now,
from our
now,
listeners before
okay,
we
now
call it a day.
that's it. So let me give you a summary here. The Civil War was avoidable, in my own estimation. If somebody like the Queen wanted to prevent the Civil War, she occupied a unique position in history to do so. She could have easily summoned the Ojukwu and Goa to Britain and tell them to stop the nonsense. And they would have complied in reverence to the honored woman. She didn't. Instead, Britain sided the federal government to exterminate 2 million Biafrans. Britain was involved because there is evidence that they gave federal government money, they gave them fighting equipment. Even their pilots were involved in pumping women and children and the hapless in Biafra, pumping them out of existence. So the place of the Queen in history, I don't know. It depends on where you are coming from. As an Igbo man, I don't. I'm not happy with that. I'm not happy with the Queen. I read what Ujuanya said. I am maybe the language, but Ujuanya spoke the truth. The language may not be so nice, like wishing the Queen an excruciating death. I wouldn't have used that, but I don't think that I would say that the Queen did not approve the Biafra War. I believe she did, and she was in a position to act in the opposite direction.
All right, thank you very much. Let's pause here for the salvation of time. We just want to join our guest online, and I will crave your indulgence for now, since we are trying to salvage time. I'll crave your indulgence to give us 2 minutes, please. Let's see how that far we can go. James, let me start with you, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sure you are hearing me.
Loud and clear.
Yes, the gentleman has done justice to the Nigerian perspective of British colonialism in the country. I wish I'm a part of your guests. I mean, if I were part of your guest, I would have been able to explain the African perspective of the problem. The Nigerian perspective is just a subset
Maybe
of.
one of these days you will be
Yeah,
one of these
thank
days you
you.
will be
Thank you.
Yeah,
You see,
every time
I'm
is
more
in country.
interested in what happened in other African states. Also, in Rhodesia, for example, that was Southern Rhodesia, horrendous atrocities happened in that country, unquantifiable atrocities. Um, the country was seized by a man because he's a Rhodes. When he went there to look for minerals, which he did not find, which he could not find. In the course of looking for the minerals, he could not pay his what's it called workers who went with him. But at the end, he found what he did not look for. That was productive farmland. They seized the land from the people in what they call, I think, Shona language, the Chumurenga War of 1897. The people of Zimbabwe fought the war courageously, and in the process of doing this, 50,000 people died. What is his name? Douglas Ian Smith, the British, what they call the colonialist, what they call him, the rebel leader of Zimbabwe, that's Southern Rhodesia, defied British authority by unilaterally declaring its independence. This is what other African states could not do. No African country was able to unilaterally declare its independence, but Douglas Ian Smith did it in Zimbabwe and he got away with it, even to the extent of executing what they call people condemned to death, which he condemned to death, and these people have been granted reprieve, that is amnesty by the Queen of England. This same Queen of England pardoned people condemned to death, and Douglas Ian Smith of Zimbabwe executed them in spite of the Queen's pardon. What did she do about it? In the year 1947, this same Queen went to South African Parliament in Cape Town to deliver a speech. I don't know, she was celebrating her birthday or something like that. The following year, 1948, the National Party won the election in South Africa and legalized apartheid, which has been there for over 400 years. This queen did absolutely nothing about it. There was a time Britain ruled over South Africa. The British government did nothing about the horrendous atrocities these people were subjected to. In the year 1961, there was an illegal constitution that came into force in what called Southern Rhodesia. Britain did absolutely nothing about it. The people launched the Second Chimurega War, 1961 or 2, and they fought it courageously till 1979, when Robert Mugabe and others now went to what they call a Lancaster Agreement talks, 1979. While that talk was going on, Nigerian government nationalized British Petroleum. I think it was Henry Adefope who was the foreign minister of Nigeria. They nationalized British Petroleum when they went to a conference, Commonwealth conference, I think in Tanzania or so. That led to the nationalization of Shell BP, and eventually in 1980, Zimbabwe got their independence from these people. Africa has suffered tremendously in the hands of Britain. In Benin City, where I grew up, in the year 1897, there was a punitive expedition for some people, and it was horrendous atrocities they committed. The artworks they looted, the Oba's palace in Benin, the Benin's all over the world are still crying to high heavens for them to return the stolen artifacts. The British government refused. The Queen of England never at any time uttered a word about those stolen artifacts. There are so many horrendous atrocities they committed. In Kenya, thousands of people were killed in Mau Mau uprising. The Queen of England did not utter any word. In what you call Ghana, there was the British Ashanti Wars, the same thing. Prempeh I of Ghana was deported to Seychelles Island for how many, God knows, the number of years. This woman did not condemn any action. Even here in Little Gambia, the Soninke Marabout Wars. The Soninkes were, the what's it called, traditional worshippers. The Marabouts were the Muslims. They were fighting each other. The British government was in place in this country. They did absolutely nothing to stop these wars. The people fought. Britain is a nuisance to the whole of Africa. There are so many things I would have mentioned, but due to limitation of time, I will not be able to do that. There are some articles, if you don't mind, I will post online for people to read, and a particular book on Zimbabwe. You let me know how to send it to you. People should know the history of what Britain has done to Nigeria and the whole of Africa. In fact, they treated us, the treatment we receive in Nigeria is even more honorable compared to what Zimbabweans went through. It was brutal exploitation, brutal murders. If there's anything like reincarnation, may she not reincarnate?
Okay, thank you. Let me go to NS. NS joining us from the US.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Okay, so I think everyone who
It's
spoke.
always a pleasure having you
Thank
joining
you.
us as a prominent female voice that will get to join us.
Thank you. So I think everybody has spoken well, and I tend to agree with most of what is being said. And that's why we should study history. I think what I'd like to do is to reframe it to present times, especially as even watching Peter Obi's campaign, the center of it being production to consumption and in many ways international trade. I think historically we Africans, or even if you go in particular to Nigeria, we've suffered because of disunity. So for example, when you say the British merged the southern and the northern protectorate, perhaps if we were allowed to evolve by ourselves, we may have got to this same place, right? So what I'm trying to say in essence is like there's ethics to international trade, and we know that these external powers often protect their interests because it's not really about the Queen of Britain. What we're talking about is how, whether it's during the time of slave trade, during the time of colonialism, and in 2022, how do we decide to engage with powerful forces externally when they are trading with us? And you find out that in most times we can be our own problems. So that's that's really just my take. So where do we go from here, and how do we resolve it, and how can we be united to form a good trading bloc? Because we know that countries must trade, and how we decide to do it is still left to us as Black people or as Africans, and how we unite against these forces. So to me, it's more, that's the question we need to be asking today.
All right. Thank you very much, NS. We appreciate your contribution. Okay. Engineer Femi, let's hear you.
Uh, okay. Next week, first female, we appreciate your contribution. They were immense and straight to the point. And because of your time, well, it looks like we have less than that to run. So I'll be brief. I will stay in the modern times and where it has left us. It has left us with a system where we are confused about how we would rule ourselves. It has left us not, and then we begin to focus on them. And that's why when China got their independence, they went into the self-discovery. And that's why they're a world power today. And they are close to being an enemy of all of the states. The Queen did his bit. My own problem is what did or undid. It hasn't become time. Have we not far past the time we should sit down and look at ourselves and do some soul searching and self discovery based on what we as a people want, where every ethnic clients and every other person sit down and say this is how we want to run? Because before they came, we had a system that was working in the north, in the south, and in the east. Though they manipulated a certain region above other for them. So, and that's why they invested their armory and all of that there so that they can use them to manipulate. You are born to rule and all that. So, for me, I mean, British petroleum was nationalized and all that. Now, what have we done with God, what God has blessed us with today? Because what has kept us in bondage is not because we were under colonial master. It was because after colonial master, we failed to look at ourselves and begin to do self soul searching and self discovery. Which, for me, a system of government that we should be running by now is parliamentary system, where each region will go to or will do regional system of government where you don't have one person lording over everywhere. So each region will compete with themselves on what they have and how they can increase and develop themselves along that line. So that's healthy competition. We bring development. But where we have, we sit down and some people qualified or not come and rule us and they will keep us where we don't want to be. It's quite ridiculous. And we can't keep blaming them for what city. They did not say can't get refinery in this country. They haven't told us that. They did not say we shouldn't pay ASU to go back to school and educate our people our rights. They did not say we shouldn't do agriculture. So those things they haven't said. If they told us that of ourselves beyond them. Nigeria first should be our policy. If we don't do that, we keep blaming them, we will just remain where we are. Just like HPC have kept my take for now because of the short time you have. Thank you, Victor.
Thank you very much, Engineer Femi. Uh, Doc,
Yeah,
your parting shot.
my parting shots. Let me just throw in a word on what Femi has said. Yes, it's important that we take our destinies in our hands, but you see, leadership and structure; those are the two twin evil, the devil in Nigeria. Structure is so fundamental. Nigeria agreed with the British colonial masters before they left that Nigeria should be organized and best run as a federal system of government. We have now converted our federalism to a unitary system. That is why nothing is working. So when Femi says that they haven't told us not to do this and not to do that, the structure imposed on us, is not allowing us to move. Certain things that you need to be able to run a state as a federated unit are all tied up in the federal powers in exclusive list. Power, state police, the railway, solid minerals, everything. They are all there in the exclusive list. So if you cannot liberate yourself economically, if you cannot liberate yourself economically because the powers are there with the federal government, it will not be right to blame the states if they are not doing what they should do. You first have to liberate them by giving them their constitutional powers. Now, the issue of, people keep saying that, you see, we can do this, we can do that. Go to North Korea. They can't even watch TV. That is leadership. That is structure. They can watch TV, phone. They have access to no phone. Are they not human beings? They are human beings. But the structure in which they have found themselves and the leadership cannot allow them to do these things. Similar things are happening in Nigeria. That's the point I'm making. Now, there is this British legacy you call divide and rule. You can't even have Southern solidarity. You can't even have a solidarity of indigenous peoples of Nigeria. You can't have that. It's divide and rule. If you say the Fulanis are everywhere, they have dominated the process and the politics, it's because they have access to the political power itself. The political power is concentrated somewhere to the exclusion of the rest. That is the point. And until that is addressed, you cannot talk about nationhood and unity. I have often argued that it is not possible to talk about development and achieve development, economic or otherwise, of any nation before you resolve the questions of nationhood. Nigeria cannot develop because we have not resolved the questions of nationhood. And the 2014 confab report would have addressed the questions of nationhood up to 50% and perhaps more. It was not implemented. Jonathan did not implement it because he could not return to power. And when it was passed October 2014, he felt that 2015 was already around the corner and it would take quite a process because much of that will have to go through the alteration of the 1999 constitution. I'm not making excuses for Jonathan, but that was one of the reasons he gave, which appeared plausible. And Buhari came in. He is from the same block that the unitary system favors, and he threw away the confab report. They even set up their own report called the Erufai Committee on Restructuring of Nigeria. They came away with very beautiful recommendations: state police, fiscal federalism, so many things the Erufai report brought in to restructure the country. That report has been dumped by the same Buhari that set it up, gathering dust somewhere. So you can see that that's why I keep saying that the problem is structure, the problem is leadership. Once the leader is not disposed to federalism, you can't get it. If Buhari wants Nigeria restructured before December, he can achieve it because he has the National Assembly in his pocket. That's the truth. But he doesn't want. Why? Because he favors him, favors his people. Do you understand that? That in his own thinking, whereas actually federalism is going to favor the North the more. We find out time to come and prove to Nigerians why federalism, through federalism, will favor Northern Nigeria more than the Southern Nigeria. And yet they are the ones fighting against it.
So that will be where we'll anchor one of these days. We hope Doc will oblige us so that we look at how through federalism we favor the North. All right, it's on that note we come to the end of today's edition of the program. Just to what has happened has re-echoed the need why we must study history in schools. Ironically, Nigeria, I don't know why we don't want our children to know the history of Nigeria. There are so many people who are even adults Some of these stories will be like Tales by Moonlight or Me Sambu stories, but they did happen in Nigeria, and that's why we are where we are today. Some have argued that Nigeria may have done better than we are today if Britain was fair to the country. But for whatever it is, the role that the monarchy played or the United Kingdom played in the evolution of Nigeria, for good or for bad, we also have an opportunity to make amends. That's where we'll wrap up on today's edition of the program. Special thanks to James, who has joined us from the Gambia, Obi Oji from the US, Paulie Wunze from the US, Engineer Femi from Abuja, Nigeria, NS from the US as well, and of course, here in the studio, Dr. Law Mefo, forensic social psychologist and public affairs analyst. Doc, thanks for coming
Thank you.
around. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
And
Thank
for your
you.
invaluable
Thank you for hosting
contributions.
me.
Thank you very much. And to the team, guys, like the West, to thank you as always for making it come to fruition once again. On behalf of the team, I am Victor Irwele thanking you for being part of the show. Tomorrow is another day. God willing, we'll be back and better. As we leave, I say, God bless your heart. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a pleasant night rest.